2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe Libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.
Hey everyone, it's Daniel and Robert, the Last Nighters, and we are going to talk about Office Space tonight. This is the 33rd episode of the show, and you can find the show notes and more at lastnighters.com/33. So hey Robert, what's happening?
Hey buddy. Yeah, what is happening? I'm just here doing the show, calling in, even though now I'm on the west side, and we might be able to do some shows mano in the near future, in the same room, as it were, being able to stare at each other longingly in the eyeballs. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and need you to listen to the Google description on this. Office Space came out 1999, romance/comedy, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 7.8 on the IMDb, 68% Metacritic, and 79% of the Rotten Tomatoes. But 90% of the Google users like it, so it's a big cult-type movie, cult hit, that did very poorly in the box office. Here is the description. Corporate drone Peter Gibbons, played by Swingers, Ron Livingston, hates his soul-killing job at software company Initech. While undergoing hypnotherapy, Peter is left in a blissful state when his therapist dies in the middle of their session. He refuses to work overtime, plays games at his desk, and unintentionally charms two consultants into putting him on the management fast track. When Peter's friends learn they're about to be downsized, they hatch a revenge plot against the company inspired by Superman 3. Director Mike Judge. Screenplay, Mike Judge. Story by Mike Judge. This is the Mike Judge film. And he was also the manager at Tchotchkes, right? As a little cameo?
He was. He was very interested in the flair of Jennifer Aniston and how above and beyond and how it matched her personality. Is that what it was?
Well, 15 was the minimum. And, if she's okay with just the minimum, then I guess that's okay. But they really want to he really supports the decision of doing a few more.
That's right. Now, I take one issue with that phraseology in the description. Would you say that the gang hatch a revenge plot against the corporation? I guess it was. I mean, Peter, he at one point says that Initech is an evil corporation, and that somehow justifies their theft. I mean, it seems like they want this cash, like they're owed it. I didn't really get their own justification. They just seemed like they wanted some money. They wanted to get back, I guess, revenge at Initech for firing them, and that was somehow justified what they did. I know we're digging right into the heart of it, but
it's the jump to conclusions show. It's $1 million idea. So why not get right into this question? Now, I've got a whole batch of memes related to Office Space and libertarian catchphrases like taxation being theft and what about the roads? And
the roads one is the best.
And if you don't like it, why don't you leave?
Yes, that one's also fantastic. The roads one is my favorite, but why should I leave when they're the ones that suck is also fantastic.
Right. And then the other one that you just talked about, or there's one with Jennifer Aniston with her query of, so you're going to take something that's not yours, and how is that not stealing? And there's a version of it related to taxation. He says, well, it becomes ours through the force of violence.
Fantastic.
So that's also a very good one. So I'll post all of these on our show notes page, and you can feel free to disseminate them, redistribute the wealth, as they like to say. But back to the crux of your question, they were doing it because they were getting fired, and they were like, fuck this company for downsizing us and making us work in these, shitty air-conditioned conditions.
Yeah, it seemed like a very privileged argument to me. Like they were owed some restitution for their voluntary employment, and that it was somehow unjust that they were fired when it seems like they don't understand that they're in a voluntary relationship, and at any given time, either party may cancel that relationship.
Yeah, no,
it seems like an entitled opinion to me.
I think that you're right from the perspective of somebody who's given it some thought and reflected on these things. But I think in the moment, without having an awareness of philosophical underpinnings of libertarianism, human action, praxeology, all those things, one would feel slighted if this bureaucratic company that was like not fun to work for brought in these consultants who were basically just going to like cut the fat, right? And then you ended up being on the chopping block. I would think that would elicit some being upset and angered by it.
Well, I suppose if you got some cushy job where you don't actually do any work, it seemed like they were cutting people who did almost nothing.
I talked to the fucking customers.
I have people skills.
Why don't you people understand this? I swear this whole episode is just going to be us like quoting stuff.
Yeah.
But, I forgot to mention this. You can find this show at the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction at thelaunchpadmedia.com. So just throw that in there. 5 minutes into the show. Let's go.
Good job, Daniel.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Launchpadians. We appreciate you.
That's right.
Oh, man. So I got derailed so quickly here. So the plot, yes, they got fired. They were probably upset about it. They wouldn't have done this had they not been fired. And I think they also pointed to the Y2K glitch as how it wouldn't even be noticed.
Right, because they were doing all the updating for the Y2K.
Right. And then what they were doing, they were rounding off like the thousandths or more of a penny, something along those lines, like several decimal or, several spaces deep.
Supposed to do that, but Michael screws up.
On some mundane detail.
It's the crux of the program, but sure, some mundane detail.
Right. Now, in a way, I almost feel like they would have to pick a point where they're going to cut it off anyway. Now, whether they can take that rounded portion and put it into an account that they opened is another matter. But I don't know. I mean, it kind of doesn't feel like as thefty as just outright theft. Do you know what I mean?
Are you defending these guys?
I'm saying that Superman 3, the plot to Superman 3, not terrible. It's still kind of stealing. But it's money that...
Kinda stealing. Kinda. You're splitting hairs here.
Well, accounting, they would have rounded it off anyway, right?
I assume they do some... I'm not an accountant, but I assume they do some sort of rounding.
Yeah, so they're just, being a middleman here. Doing a little rake off the top. And because Michael screwed it up, the rake was a little bit bigger and it became more noticeable. But, it's like the little give a penny, take a penny. Not the jar. That's for the crippled children.
Okay, I want you to give me a serious answer here, Daniel. Is it theft or is it not?
All right, I think technically it is, though.
No. Screw this technically crap. I don't want to hear any technicality crap. I want you to give me a definitive answer. Yes or no?
It becomes theirs. Yeah, so, yeah, they're stealing.
They're taking something that doesn't belong to them, that is somebody else's.
Through subterfuge, like underhanded sneakiness, to where it
through a virus.
Would not even be noticed. Had he not screwed it up.
Which they affected somebody else's property.
That's true, yeah. Yep, they're thieves. They're thieves.
They're thieves. Thieves!
Thieves, I say.
And these are our protagonists. We're supposed to feel sympathy for them and root for them.
Right, but we don't know that they're thieves until near the end of the film. Like the movie goes along and there's a lot of stage setting. Like we don't get to we're going to take the money until like almost 2/3 through.
Correct. Yeah. We get that Peter's not happy, and then we get him hypnotized, and then he's happy, and then we get the subplot with Jennifer Aniston, and then having sex with Lumbergh, and then he realizes it's a different guy. There's a lot that happens in this film. It is, I guess, a comedy / romance, although there's not a whole lot of romance in the movie, but whatever. It's still good stuff.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, you've seen this movie dozens of times, and I have as well. I always thought that Jennifer Aniston was in it more until watching it again in preparation for the show. I mean, she's in there for maybe 10 minutes of screen time, really.
Yeah. There's not a lot of them actually doing a whole lot. She's in a few scenes, but not a lot is asked of her. She's probably the big star at the time. Is this before Friends, or is this after Friends, or during Friends?
I think this is a during Friends thing. 99. Yeah. It's a during Friends.
So she would have been the big get for the movie.
Yeah, and then Diedrich Bader, he was doing the Whose Line Is It Anyway stuff, and Ron was just in Swingers a few years prior, and he's basically the same guy.
Right.
And he wasn't the big star out of that one either. It was our man Vince Vaughn.
Yes, he was, Daniel.
Who is also not a pussy.
Now, there's an interesting. The one thing that jumped out at me while watching this film, because I always look at the economic stuff, and the economic stuff always jumps out at me because of my perspective. But you get Peter's argument that he's working at this soulless job, at this job that he hates for this evil corporation. And he thinks that no human was ever meant to work in a cubicle, and therefore somehow Initech is evil. And then he's having this interview with the Bobs, and he says that there's a motivation problem in essentially capitalism, because Pete says, well, he works harder and Initech sells a few more units, but he doesn't see any extra money. So I'm going to ask you, Daniel, is there a motivation problem? And I think it's hilarious because there's a massive motivation problem under socialism and communism. But does capitalism also have a motivation problem? I think this is a softball. I think you're going to knock this one out of the park, but I'm just going to throw it at you.
Well, in unfettered capitalism, where you would see the fruits of your own labors, then there would be absolutely no motivation problem whatsoever, because the amount of effort that you put into something dashed in with a little bit of entrepreneurial risk in hoping that you're satisfying the needs and wants of other consumers, you get direct feedback, and that's what drives the profit and loss system. And that's how you optimize where resources are going, because unprofitable things cannot be continued for very long because people have that direct feedback mechanism. So the motivation problem is a non-factor in that level of capitalism. Now, in Peter's particular instance, he's probably on a salary of some sort. So there is a bit of a disconnect between them shipping a few more units and him seeing a direct benefit, though the company itself would be performing better and thus be in a better position to remain stable and provide him future raises, profit sharing, stock, etc. So it's a few levels removed, but he would still see benefit from them shipping a few more units.
Whether or not he would realize that or not.
Right. And if he wanted a more direct
matter.
connection, then he could be in the sales department, where his
Right.
commission is directly related to the number of sales.
And another thing that I think mostly goes unnoticed among the vast majority of workers worldwide is the understanding of time preference. The understanding that you are trading, a bigger chunk of the profit for a stable and steady pay. You get paid before Initech ever sees a dime. There's all the money that got put into R&D and building up sales and building contacts and all that stuff. You're just like kind of taken for granted, and you're just coming in, doing your job, getting paid right away. You get that weekly paycheck, whereas Initech might be deferring, that payment for a larger risk for the bigger reward later on. So I think, when workers gripe about, I'm worth more to this company than my salary, I don't think that they're taking in that whole picture of the risk involved that the owner is.
Right, nor the amount of capital and equipment that's placed at the worker's feet to be able to perform the amount of work that they're outputting, right? Like try doing all that stuff with your bare hands. How long is that going to take you versus being provided the equipment? And they're not paying for that equipment. Now, in some instances, like, certain mechanic shops, and I'm sure, there's a bunch of other examples where the employee or the laborer does have to provide their own equipment. And that's a little bit different, but still the concentration of the other factors being brought to bear makes it a better situation for that worker, even though they're bringing their own tools. Because if all it took was having the tools, then go and open your own shop.
Right.
But if there's like a place that's willing to, build a full building for you and pay for the lights and lease the area and advertise and bring in customers and all that stuff, then you're in a better position to get more work and get more sales. And for them to do that at a loss, well, as we just said a moment ago, things that you continually lose on, you kind of stop doing so that those resources can be allocated to something that is more effective at satisfying consumer wants and desires.
Absolutely, buddy. Now, if we could switch it up just a little bit.
PC load letter, what the fuck is that?
By the way, it was a lot of fun listening to all the hip hop songs again and watching the destruction of the copier again. That still makes me smile every time I see it. And in the beginning, when he's listening to the hardcore rap in traffic, that's good time.
And the guy walks by, and he just like nonchalantly or secretively closes or locks the door. It's hilarious.
Locks the door and turns down the music and just acts like he's not listening to anything. Yep, it's pretty cool. But Peter, he goes to a hypnotist. And the hypnotist basically puts him at ease with everything, like just makes him calm and relaxed. And he's just pretty much okay with what would you say is Peter's transformation? Is he stop feeling anxiety about things? He stop worrying about things? Because he goes from, trying to, apologizing for the TPS reports to, I don't like work. I'm just not going to go anymore. I don't think I like paying bills. I'm not going to do that anymore. I mean, is he kind of turning into like some sort of a communist here? Or what's going on?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And the hypnotist is really good because she's anorexic now. Well, yeah, he's really good. I thought that was hilarious. So, yeah, I mean, he's a young guy he's got 8 different bosses who tell him about the TPS reports, and each one of them tells him like 3 or 4 different ways in the same interaction, and then he hears it, multiple times. So it's got to drive you crazy. But I think that the hypnotist really just put him in a state of not giving a fuck. Like he really wants to do nothing. He references the guidance counselor quiz, and I'm actually similar in, I think I took something like that, and I was sort of like equally good in a lot of different areas, and nothing really stood out because it's supposed to, like help you pick what you want to do.
Right.
And I never really got a good answer of it. And he said in the movie that, what would you do if you had $1 million? And I like I said, I never really had an answer. But Michael Bolton says the question is bullshit. No one would want to be a janitor because no one wants to go around cleaning up shit all day. That's the incentive problem, which is very similar to the motivation problem. And that's another issue with socialism, in that the jobs that are undesirable or unfun or hard to do, if everyone equally gets the same amount despite whatever job they do or don't do, as Peter's case would be, because his desire is to do nothing, then how would those jobs get done? Other than at the point of a gun or with a bayonet in your back.
Right. And they would do them just enough to not get fired, as Peter was doing.
Right.
And yeah, like what's the incentive, to be a doctor where you have to go to work or you have to go to school for 8 years, but you're going to get paid the same amount as the guy who, just goes to high school and starts working right away. It messes up all of the human, the incentives that humans respond to.
Right. And the, what's the guy's name who talked about the jump to conclusions, Matt? Is it Stankowski or something like that?
I couldn't tell you the guy's name.
Well, he actually was onto something there. He was like, the guy who made up the pet rock, he made $1 million. So he's talking about, taking entrepreneurial risk, coming up with a new idea, a new product, starting a business, taking it upon yourself to get something new into the world and provide value for others. I mean, even a pet rock, as dumb of an idea as that is, people bought it because they preferred to do that with the money they had than something else. So they ended up buying these pet rocks. And so I think that really is the way out from Peter's situation. Now the Bobs, they thought that his lack of caring, his almost nihilistic, I don't want to do anything at all, was just a sign of him not being challenged or not having enough to like keep him focused. And that reminds me of what you hear about in like school when they talk about kids who are struggling with school. And that's back when we were growing up. I think nowadays they just say, oh, put them on ADD meds or something.
Yeah, they just overprescribe Ritalin and, problem solved.
Yeah, so yeah, it's pretty crazy. And just as an aside, I also do entrepreneurial stuff myself, and I have a site for that. So if anyone would be interested, do check that out at blackand.gold. So it's not a .com, it's actually .gold, black and then a dot and gold. And check it out. There's a bunch of good information on there that I've been working on to help you be entrepreneurial as well. End scene. Or end plug.
Way to fit in the plugs there, Daniel. Just naturally
so natural
into those things. So smooth.
And actually, I'm almost purposefully ham-fisting this so it stands out.
Yeah.
How could you
Now
forget?
we're calling attention to it right now by talking about it even more. So
Black and gold. All right. Check out Channel 9. Got to wake my ass up at 6 a.m. every day this week. Yeah, I'm doing the drywall down at the new McDonald's over there in Salida.
Yeah, there's like a breast exam going on.
Yeah. Diedrich Bader, I think he was like the best. He did the best performance in this whole thing.
I really can't fault his performance. I mean, it's fairly over the top, but it's all good.
Listen, we can't tell anyone about this. Not wives, not girlfriends.
Don't worry, I won't tell anybody about it either.
Who the fuck is that?
Don't worry, he's cool.
Oh, good stuff. I watched this movie at 2x speed on YouTube because I could, and because I've seen the movie so many times, and I've been, like you, pressed for time lately. I mean, you had the whole move happen recently. or until moments ago, actually.
Indeed.
But my wife and I have been watching Spartacus after the kids go to bed, and it keeps just leaving you on cliffhangers. And so every night I'd be like, well, we're going to do Swingers next on the show. I got to watch the movie. And she's like, well, can't we just watch Spartacus? So I actually finished watching this 2x speed this morning. So good times, good times. That's why this is...
Are we doing Swingers?
Oh, I'm sorry. Office Space. I'm calling it Swingers because of Livingston.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And now we can call him Swingers. There was one other thing that the entrepreneurial guy said. He said, they're bringing in these consultants to do downsizing. So you got to interview for your own job. And if you lose your job, then you have to go down to the state unemployment office and stand in line with those scumbags.
That's an interesting line.
I think that has a little bit of merit. I mean, if you've lost your job, I feel bad for you, son, but you got to, take individual responsibility, right?
Yeah. In fact, I don't know anybody that just doesn't, jump into the unemployment line and, expect that state unemployment to kick in and be like, okay, well, I got some time to, find a job and milk this system for a while.
Yeah. My wife, before she met me, she dated a guy who worked construction. And because it's relatively seasonal, like you can really only do it, late spring through fall, they would lay off their workers and then they would all just go and collect unemployment for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
That was just how they did it.
And I'm sure, that's another way that these government incentives just bastardize and destroy and disincentivize, productivity.
Indeed. So I know you pivoted us over to this area, and I don't know if we've actually addressed your purpose. Have we done so, sir?
Well, I mean, I was maybe wanting to get into the root mindset of communists, but I don't know if that's not above our pay grade. I don't know if we're able to effectively address that. I mean, I wanted to, ask if Peter's essentially expressing the communist, id or ego or, base level desires or something, because he's essentially had, a fair amount of his psyche stripped away, right? Like this anxiety, worry part of his brain. And he's just left with whatever this pure idea of, well, I don't want to work, so I shouldn't have to. Kind of like this Marxist view of the world where, today I want to be a plumber and tomorrow I want to be a painter and then the next day I'm not going to work because I shouldn't have to. So it seemed like he was kind of living this ideal, especially with this whole, Initech is this evil corporation and no human being should have to work in a cubicle. That's just the worst thing ever. It's such a privileged argument to make. I mean, tell that argument to the guy working in the coal mine and going like, working in a cubicle is just the worst, man. Can you imagine working in a cubicle? It's the most soul-destroying thing ever. Nobody should ever have to work in a cubicle.
Yeah.
While the guy's just got black lung and he's just staring at him, looking at him with death eyes.
I got the black lung, Pop. We should do Zoolander sometime. I think you're right. I mean, it is a very privileged thing. And back to the mindset of communists and socialists, I think that they have this glossy cover of, everyone's provided for and we're all just mutually sharing and everyone's going to work equally hard for the good of the collective. We're going to build a new socialist man and it's going to be this great workers' paradise where you're only have to work a couple of hours a day and there's not going to be any hunger or need for want. The other modes of production, capitalism, etc., leads to all sorts of waste and exploitation of worker and toil and long hours. I think Kropotkin even suggested that the same amount of work could get done in just 10 hours a week versus 40 or 50. Of course, they're all wrong, but that is the platitudes that are put forth and sold to the masses. It's another opiate,
Well, I could tell him how he's going to be able to get the more productivity, get that much productivity out of a worker in 10 hours as they would in 40 hours. And that's by increasing the level of technology. And all of a sudden you put a computer in front of a person as opposed to a pickaxe or a piece of paper and a pencil. And they're able to be vastly more productive. But under Kropotkin's system, the computer never would have been invented because there would have been no incentive to do so.
Right. Now, I don't know if this is, my flavor of communism is better than your flavor of communism, but in Cambodia, they actually stripped the capital, like any level of tools or automation other than hand tools, from the people so that everyone was employed in these slave labor camps.
Well, everyone that was still alive. I mean, if they wore eyeglasses, then they were just shot in the back of the head because clearly
They were
that person couldn't be allowed.
a threat to the system.
Yeah.
But that's
So yeah, they willingly threw away technology and capital and productivity. And surprise, surprise, millions of people starved and were killed. Yeah, it didn't end well for some reason.
and
Can't imagine what.
next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day. So if you want, you can wear a Hawaiian shirt and blue jeans. And Robert, I do have to tell you, you don't need $1 million to do nothing. Just look at my cousin. He's broke and doesn't do shit.
I think you've seen this movie a few times. You are rattling off pretty much every line.
2 chicks at the same time.
Okay, we just need to record have you record a soundboard for each one of these like Daniel quote movies, and then we'll just randomly hit them, like have a cat walk across the soundboard or something.
I do believe you'd get your ass kicked for saying something like that. Oh man, this is good stuff. So this reminds me of our Billy Madison episode, and that literally was just me cracking up at all the quotes that you had written and recited to me, and recanted how many times you'd heard them.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, when we did the Billy Madison episode, it was such just a quote fest because Billy Madison was probably the movie that was quoted the most. I mean, that along with Ace Ventura, this movie, many others, but mostly Billy Madison. I'd heard those lines so many times that I decided to just write it down every time I heard one of those multi, just ones that were just burrowed into my brain. I didn't do that this time, but there are some standout quotes that you've already said, but a lot of a lot of the boss was quoted endlessly. I'm going to have you come in on Saturday. Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff was said a lot growing up.
Yeah. Now, is it hard to believe that this movie did terrible at the box office?
Was it up against some kind of competition? Because I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine this got a big wide release, but it should have done fairly well. I mean, this is Mike Judge. He's coming off of Beavis and Butthead,
Yeah, I think that I read a little bit about it, and they said that the marketing plan for this was just terrible. It's like an ensemble cast, and like you mentioned, Aniston was probably the big draw. They didn't even reference her in the movie poster. It's just a guy covered in Post-it notes.
Right, it's just Milton, right?
If you can even tell, it's just a guy in Post-it notes.
I mean, that's the cover of the DVD is Milton covered in Post-it notes.
Oh, well, maybe that's what it is, but I don't think that's going to draw in the the movie going public,
No, probably not. Although I'm glad the movie found its audience and is, essentially a cult classic because it does. It holds up over time. I mean, it's been, 19 years since it was released. And I mean, I can't, it's impossible to watch it with fresh eyes and go, man, this is hilarious. But, there's so many just choice stuff that it still brings a smile to your face if you're not just, laughing still. So
yeah, I just stare at my desk so it looks like I'm working, and it's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I don't care.
I like how you're just throwing lines at me completely out of context. Doesn't really fit what I'm saying. It's fine.
Illegal. This is America. Oh man, that part was funny too when he was talking about the conjugal visits and the country club prison. If they ended up getting caught for doing their Take a Penny, Superman 3.
Were they going to get pounded in the ass prison or whatever it was?
Well, that's what, after they talked to Stan Kowski's lawyer, and he said, conjugal visits? No, you'd be sent to federal pound me in the ass prison. And then they got all scared about it. But yeah, it's pretty funny. Pretty funny stuff.
Yeah, it still holds up. I mean, here we are watching it 19 years later as older and somewhat wiser human beings and still entertains us. So that's the sign of a good movie.
I would agree, yes.
I don't know if a young kid watching it today is going to identify with it so much. I mean, this is the kind of the movie that I associate with like the Dilbert comic strip because they're both about, offices and ridiculous stuff. But and I don't think Dilbert is really in the zeitgeist as it once was, if it ever was. But Scott Adams had a terrific run with that strip.
Yeah, I wonder if at the time, if this seemed like it was a ripoff of Dilbert.
Probably drew some inspiration, kind of hard not to. But, living and working in an office is such a ubiquitous thing. I'm surprised that more people didn't, really identify with it right away and make it more of an instantaneous success. But I guess if the marketing was just atrocious, then yeah, it could get lost in the shuffle. But but it's a fairly universal feeling, right? I mean, I don't think anybody really loves sitting in that fluorescent lighting cubicle environment, tapping away at a computer for 8 hours a day, unless you really love what you do. I mean, there are people that, like make video games all their lives, in a very similar type environment. And I don't think they would necessarily, even though that can be brutal, would feel the same way as Peter does in this movie. But I'm sure there are a large number of people who do feel similarly, because even though I don't think no human should work in a cubicle, because clearly they prefer it to being a janitor or any number of terrible jobs, it isn't, I wouldn't say, the height of, I don't know, what's the right word? What am I trying to say? Like the height of rewarding, inspiring, human thriving type creative wonderland world jobs. I don't know. I could see why people would, feel worn down and resentful eventually of that sort of thing. But I think people, especially when they've got a bit of time invested, start to feel like they deserve things. Like you're at this company for 5 years, 10 years, and then you're just summarily fired. You feel like, what the hell? I have all this time and energy invested in this company, and this is how you treat me. But, you don't. You're not guaranteed employment. You aren't owed employment, just like they aren't owed your labor. And I think that's just gets lost to a lot of people, especially when they're feeling put out.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes personal, right? Because they've built relationships with the people and feel like that they've been spending that time, and then that is all invested, right? It's building up capital for them, that, political or relationship capital, and then to have that not be worth as much as they thought when it comes down to it, when it comes down to like downsizing or whatever happens. But the company is doing that with imperfect information. They're trying to be a forecaster of where things are headed and making decisions and adjustments to try to minimize losses and maximize their profits. And so, if anything, they're trying to allocate resources more effectively.
Yeah, and be more efficient. And I think as an employee, that's a good lesson, right? I mean, what did you expect when you had a job where you could afford to zone out for hours at a time? Or, where the one guy had a job where he really didn't do anything. I mean, how long do you really think that's going to last in the private sector? I mean, maybe in the public sector you can get away with that horse shit.
What would you say?
You don't actually have to do anything
here?
And provide any results. But they demand results in the private sector.
Ghostbusters nod. Yes.
That's right.
But yeah, you're exactly right. Now, in the individual instance, of course, it's sad, right? But, many times people end up finding something better as a result of having to reassess what they're doing, because people get into routines, right? And sometimes it takes that shock of being laid off or a company going under or whatever, and then they have to figure out what else they need to do.
Right. And, it teaches you a good lesson to become more valuable to an employer. Take on more responsibility, take on, learn more skills, be a greater value, be indispensable to that company, and the Bobs aren't going to cut you. But, if you just sit around all day and you don't really do anything, and the Bobs come along and they're like, so what do you do? And you just sit there and stammer and say you got people skills. Yeah, you probably deserve to get canned. I don't know what to tell you, man. And then to claim that it's some sort of injustice. I mean, yeah, the two programmers thought it was an injustice because they were the, quote, best programmers at Initech. But if they could be outcompeted by some, what did they say, like graduate students or something like that, recent graduates they were going to pay a lot less to do essentially the same thing.
Right, or they farm out some of the work to Singapore.
Right. So if you're getting outcompeted, you got to kind of realize that you're getting outcompeted. I don't know what to tell you. You can't sit there and whine and say it's unfair, because how many people did you outcompete in the first place to get the job? To then turn around and go, well, this is unfair that somebody else is outcompeting me for my job. Give me a break. It's a competitive market. It's a meritocracy. I don't know what to tell you.
But yeah, in the moment, I'm sure it's painful and a bit of a gut check, and then you got to figure out what else you can do. But that is the motivation. We're finally answering your initial question at the top of the show here. That's the motivation for them to go through with their Superman 3 plot. They're like, fuck this company. I'm mad. They're just tossing us aside like garbage. And so let's screw them a little bit here. And because they're so focused on Y2K, they won't even notice. We'll make a handsome profit and be able to, cover our expenses, and everything will be fine. A little bit of theft, but they won't even notice, and it'll be fine. And then Michael screws up the mundane detail, and they try to make amends. They return the money, they do the confession letter, But Milton has been lurking in the shadows the whole time, muttering under his breath that every time they do something to him, take a stapler, move him for the third or fourth time within the movie itself, that he's going to burn the building down. And he finally does it, which
he sure does.
Saves our heroes from getting caught.
So there's no consequences for their actions.
Yeah, none really. I mean, they did get the fear in them for a moment, and they realized they'd done a bad thing. So I think they did learn a lesson, and they didn't necessarily need to be like punitively punished to have that lesson come through. Like if going to prison is supposed to rehabilitate you and have you learn your lesson, give you time to reflect, or whatever the sort of bullshit argument is, why someone would lock someone else in a cage for something like that. It's like an extended timeout if you were a kid. Then if that was the case, if that was the purpose of such a thing, even if it was federal pound me in the ass prison and give you the O-face, they learned that lesson without even having to go through that process.
Well, let's give you some skin in the game, Daniel. You are the owner of Initech, and you realize that this money has all been stolen, and you are furious, and you launch an investigation to find out who did it. And then Milton doesn't burn down the building, and you find the confession letter. What steps do you take? Do you go, well, they're giving it back, they feel bad, no problem? Or do you want some sort of punishment put on these guys?
Well, I would use, if it's me personally, then I would not, run to Big Daddy government. I would be probably inclined to appreciate the honesty and making me aware that there is such a vulnerability in the systems here. But probably also fire them and use whatever social pressures I had to make it known that they had done something of this nature. And so it would probably limit their endeavors to work in the same field in the future.
Yeah, okay. We're in agreement then. Yeah, because they'd already fired the two programmers, but I would have been, like, Peter, take a hike, buddy. That's basically what I would have done. And use what social pressures and whatnots to alert people that these guys had done this. Because, they probably learned their lesson, but did they really? And what lesson did they learn? Did they learn that, it's wrong to steal? Or did they learn that, this whole idea of revenge against this company because you feel, slighted because you're some pretty princess and somebody, didn't want to go to your 21st birthday ball, if these analogies make any sense to you?
No, that's all right. Say hello to Lumberg for me.
These guys were these entitled little princesses that because they got fired, they're like, I'm going to go postal because I got fired. Grow up. Be an adult. People get fired all the time. That doesn't mean that the company they work for is evil. It's this entitled outlook on life that really, really annoys me. It's this super lefty kind of look like, I deserve this because I'm a special little snowflake. No, you're not.
Yeah, it's like all those people who graduate from college with like useless degrees and then they get upset that they have high debt and no job prospects.
Yeah.
Well, what'd you go for? Why did you even go? If that's the case. If you want me to wear more flair, then why not make the minimum 37?
You tell him, Daniel.
It's what I'm saying.
Freaking tell him. I feel like I'm talking to Daniel on Facebook at this point, where he just like posts GIFs.
GIFs with a little blurb, a little cutting blurb that is meant to have multiple meanings.
Yeah, somebody posts this really thoughtful paragraph, really asking some deep question. Daniel's answer, some GIF of Ace Ventura talking about his butthole or something. I've
been doing a lot of Billy Madison ones lately. It's been great.
Nice.
The What Day Is It October is one, and then the Marco Polo, because that's like pretty much the same scene, but it's good stuff. Oh, so good.
If you say so. All
right, so I've got 8 different bosses, and they're all telling me that we are running low on time on this. So let's get a last, whatever else you got on your plate, and then final summary and review.
I've got nothing on my plate. The only thing is the acting was decent. It wasn't like super spectacular, but I'm sure this is like a fairly low budget flick.
Actually, you know what? I have something before we get into that. What'd you think of Orlando Jones, Steve, who's pretending to be a crackhead because it helps him sell magazines, and he actually does far better selling magazines than he ever did working at Inatrode, which Peter later refers to as Penetrode, which I thought was hilarious.
Well, it is. I suppose you could call it fraud. You're misrepresenting who you are. It's kind of similar to people, begging for change that have some kind of sign, which is false. And you see those all the time.
Yeah, I always
And,
like it when they say, who's kidding? I just want a beer.
Yeah. At least that's, fairly honest, or at least it's somewhat more honest than who knows whatever else they're always talking about. They always have those little signs that everyone knows they're ridiculous, and they're almost always suspect, if not outright ridiculous lies. But I don't. It's not like that would be any kind of a prosecutable offense in my mind. You're out there playing on other people's emotions, right? You're like, oh, I'm a crackhead. I'm trying to do myself better. Take pity on me and buy more magazines. Much in the same way that take pity on me for X, Y, and Z problems that are on my crudely written sign. So give me more money. They're not forcing you to give you any money. So you're getting, that cathartic experience of, donating charity. So you feel good giving them that money, regardless of whether or not what they're saying is actually true. You're buying with your donated dollars that feeling of helping this person, with their dead dog or their lost dog and trying to get to Alaska and, whatever the story is. So you're kind of buying this story and you kind of want it to believe it.
Are you writing a
regardless of whether it's true or not?
You writing a country song, Robert?
Yeah. My dead dog and I are trying to get to Alaska.
On country roads?
On country roads. So give me your $5. It writes itself. I'm telling you, country music writes itself. You just tell a really sad story. And just the saddest story you can think of. But country music really does have good stories. I mean, everybody likes a good sad story to listen to. So anyway, yeah. I think we've discussed this in the past, but I don't think it's the worst thing ever. I think you're both adults and you're both getting something in that transaction, regardless of whether that transaction is true or not. But, it is fraud. I mean, you are misrepresenting yourself. But what would what kind of restitution would you want? Just alert somebody that, hey, these people are liars. Oh, spoiler alert, everybody already knows.
Right. It's kind of like you take it as a given that they're giving you some bullshit yarn, right?
Yeah.
And you still, decide what to do with it. And Peter, in this case, for buying Steve's silence, he buys 40 subscriptions to Vibe.
Yeah. I don't know why he wouldn't get one of each different kind of magazine, but okay.
I think at that point they just wanted him out the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway. So why don't we get into the final summary and review? You started with the acting, so go for it, my man.
Okay. So, I wouldn't call necessarily, the acting was all fairly serviceable, although I wouldn't say it was fantastic. I don't know if Mike Judge, is really kind of like a director's director. I think he's just like, a funny guy. He's a writer, director. He's a very talented man. But I don't think he's going out there making like these auteur type movies. I think he's more in it for the funny and he's looking for the jokes to land. So, you're going into this looking at a comedy, which is what it is. And that's fantastic. It's not trying to be a whole lot of other things that it would fail miserably at. It's just trying to make you laugh. And I'm sure it made me laugh many, 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 many times over the years. I don't think I laughed this time, but I was smiling through most of it. And that's just mostly nostalgia, at the jokes that at one time made me laugh. But you can only hear, the same joke so many times before you stop laughing. So, in that, this movie succeeds very well. I'm glad that it holds up after all this time. I don't know if it's going to hit the youth today like it hit me back in the day. I'd be interested to know, are people discovering this movie and going, oh, this is great? Or if this is a movie very much of its time. And I suspect it's more of its time. But I'd like to know if the kids today or could watch it and really get into it. I don't know. And I guess I just don't have that perspective. But as far as like any kind of a number, I can't give a comedy, much higher than like a 7. It's just, you just can't do it because it's not like the greatest story ever told and best acting ever and best cinematography and best directing. You're not getting anything like that. So I'm going to give this movie just a 7. It's a great movie for what it is, what it tries to be. And even though its main characters are a bunch of self-entitled little commies, still a good movie. So I'll pass it along to Daniel.
With sports. So this was one of those defining movies that I associate with, my childhood. It's one that I've watched dozens of times, and it stuck with me. It was one of the movies that I likened with my initial efforts in the workforce, and I was working in a cube farm very similar to this, and I had a boss who would move us around almost at his own whim, and I think that was just an exercise in that he could, and it was a big pain in the ass. But I also really liked Livingston from Swingers, and so this one was a good movie for me. It has tons of quotable stuff, and it is one that you can go back and rewatch. Like I said, I watched this at 2x speed in YouTube, which is a cool feature I figured out. You know how we have been buying movies on Vudu, and now how all the services are tied together. If the rights to the studios are associated with each of those, then you can get movies you've bought in Vudu in YouTube or iTunes or other areas, and the YouTube version lets you adjust the playback speed. So for a light comedy like this that you've seen a bunch of times, and if you don't have a lot of time, I recommend this. Watch the movie at 1.5 or 2x, and that way you get all of the hits. You know, you get that dopamine from watching it and the nostalgia, and you have time to go and actually do something productive. Unlike Peter Gibbons, who would prefer to do nothing, and it would be everything that he thought it would be. So I'm going to watch out for my cornhole and give this an 8.0 face as my final summary and review and rating.
Lovely, Daniel. Lovely times. What's up next for the peoples here?
All right. Well, I think next week we're going to try to introduce having a guest and talk about a documentary called Schooling the World, and it's going to go through the different education models that are working in the world and where the U.S. system came from in the Prussian model. And we'll be able to get into some of the history on that with our special guest who's very, very familiar with that stuff. And it's a topic I've wanted to explore. We've got kids of our own, and we're starting to, see what schooling options are out there, including, homeschooling and unschooling. And that's probably the preference. But knowing what the history of the system we have here will be very useful in being able to make appropriate decisions for yourself. So it's called Schooling the World. I will post a link to the film itself on our show notes page for this at lastnighters.com/33. So you'll be fully prepared to be able to go and after listening to this episode, prep for the next one, and it should be a lot of fun.
Sounds great, buddy. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us, audience. We're going to do the end of the show here. So thank you so much. You can find this at thelaunchpadmedia.com, where they're always throwing new ideas in your direction or launching them in your direction. Also, the show notes at lastnighters.com/33. I do appreciate you joining, and have a good night. Good night from last night.